Hello everyone. In this video, I want to show you an example on how to send HTTP requests to a remote server and getting the response back in JSON format. Then I'll show you how to parse that JSON data so that you can use these data in your application. And right here, you can see I have created a new project inside of IntelliJ IDE, and it only contains one Java file, which is the main.java. And it does not contain any external libraries except for the JDK itself. But before we do anything inside here, I want to show you the API endpoint that I'm going to send my request to and get my data from. So now I'm inside of my browser here, and this is the website that I'm going to use. It's called jasonplaceholder.typicode.com, and they provide fake online REST API for testing and prototyping. And if you scroll down here, you can see they provide different endpoints, and they support all the popular HTTP request method. And in this example, I will use the album link. So this is the URL that I'm going to use. So I copy this, and this is the result that we're going to get when we run our application. So now let's switch back to IntelliJ to start coding. Now we switch back to IntelliJ. So there are two different ways to send an HTTP request in Java, and I will show you both of them. First, let's start with the first method, which we will use the java.net.http URL connection API. So this is method 1. Java.net.http URL connection. Okay, so let's begin with defining our connection first. So above our main method, let's define our connection. So private static HTTP URL connection and connection. Okay. And inside our main method, let's first define our URL. So URL, let's import the URL. Let's import the URL library. So java.net URL, and then equals new URL, and then paste in our API endpoint, which is jasonplaceholder.typicode.com/albums. And there are some exceptions that we need to handle. So try to surround it with try and catch. And then we can open our connection to this API endpoint. So connection equals URL dot open connection. And I think this is another exception, so let's add a catch clause, and then we need to typecast this to HTTP URL connection, so there's no error anymore. And now we open our connection, we need to set up our request a little bit. So let's do some setup. So request setup. First things first, let's set our request method. So connection.set request method, we'll use the get method, and next we'll set some connection timeout and the read timeout. So connection.set connect timeout, I'll say 5,000. Which is in millisecond. So 5,000 millisecond, which is equal 5 seconds. So after 5 seconds, if the connection is still not successful, we'll just time it out. So, and then connection.set read timeout, which is also 5 seconds. So that's it. That's our, we set up our connection. Now we can try to get some response from the server. First things first, let's get our response code to see if our connection is successful. So let's define the status. Let's get our response code, and let's print this out and see if our connection is successful or not. So print lane status, and let's run this and see if we can get 200. There we go. We got 200, which is connection successful. So now we get our connection established. We can try to get the response from our endpoint. With HTTP URL connection, the response we get is a input stream. So in order to read a input stream, we're going to need a input stream reader, and we're going to wrap inside of a buffer reader. So first, let's define those. Up on top, before we do the try and catch, let's define a buffer reader. Let's call it reader, and then let's define a string for reading every line, and then let's define a string buffer. This is used to append our result, to append each line and build our response content. Okay, so response content equals new string buffer. Okay, now we can try to read the response and build our response content. So let's first handle the situation where status is not successful. So when this happens, right, when status is not within the range of 200, which means our connection has some problem. And in this case, we want to do is use the reader to read the error message. So buffer reader and new input stream reader and connection dot get error stream. So we use these to get the error message from our endpoint, and then do a while loop. Line equals reader dot read line is not equal to null, which means we still have things to read. We want to append to our response content. Okay, so this way we'll build the response content from our input stream, and after the reading is complete, we will close the reader. Okay, so now if our connection is successful, we'll handle this in the else. So we'll basically do the same thing, except for at the end, we instead of using get arrow stream, we want use get input stream. So the rest is basically the same. So I'm just gonna copy and paste. So after all of this, we should have the response inside of response content. So let's see if we get the response correctly. So system.out.println response content dot to string. So we convert the string buffer to string and print that out. And let's run this, see we get our albums. Yeah, there we go. We should have 100 albums. So ID 1, ID 2, ID 3. Let's see if we get all 100 IDs. So 16, 35, 57, all the way to 99, 100. So yes. So we get the response successfully. Now, there's one last thing we need to do before we finish the first method, which is we need to close the connection. So after the try and catch, the last catch statement, we want to add a finally keyword, and we'll say connection.disconnect. So just don't forget that. And so there we go. We complete our first method to getting the response from our remote server. Now let's talk about the second method. So the second method, which is added in Java 11. So if you're not using Java 11, method 1 is your only option. But if you're using Java 11, you can use method 2, which is, in my opinion, much better, much cleaner code, handle things more concise. So let's get started. Let's first comment out the first method, and then also the variable connection. And then down here, we'll have our second method, method 2, which is the which uses java.net.http client. This is the new API that is added in Java 11, and it actually handles things asynchronously. So in a real-world application, if you're using method 1, you're not going to do this in your main thread, because this will block your operation. For example, if you're using this in Android development, you probably need to put this in a async task, because you don't want your UI thread to be blocked. But if you're using method 2, the API itself will handle asynchronous operations for you. So let's see how to do that using this new Java 11 API. So first things first, let's create our HTTP client. Client equals HTTP client dot new HTTP client. And next, we need to build our HTTP request. So HTTP request equals HTTP request dot no new builder, and then inside of new builder, we need to put our URI. So dot URI, and then URI dot create. Inside of create is our JSON placeholder website. So paste it in. After this, we say dot build. This will build our request. After the request is built, okay, we can use our client and send this request. So let me type this out, and I will explain it like step by step. So client dot send async, and the first parameter is our request, and the second parameter is HTTP response dot body handlers dot f string, and then type then apply HTTP response colon body, and then accept. We want to print out the results. So system.out println, and then we say dot join. So this is how we send the request using the client and send it asynchronously. And let's see if we can get the result from the JSON placeholder. We should get our 100 albums printed out. So yes, so we got 100 albums. Yes. So what happened here is we first created our client, and then we built our request using the JSON placeholder URL. And then we can send this request using our client, and we want it to send asynchronously. And the second parameter here means that we would tell the server we want to receive this response body as a string. Okay, and the send async method will return a completable future type data type. And this completable feature is added since Java 8 and is mainly used for asynchronous programming. So this then apply means that once this send async is done, once we receive the response, we want to apply this method to the previous result. Okay, and this double colon sign means this is a lambda expression. It means that we want to use the body method from the HTTP response class on the previous result. So we want to get the body from the HTTP response. And once that is done, we want to use that body to print out use the println method. Okay, so this is like a streamline operation. So once the previous step is done, we do the next step. Once this step is done, we do the next step. And once this is done, we want to join. Join is basically just return the results, from the completable future to the current state. So that's why we see the result on our console. If we don't do join, we won't see anything at all. Okay, I can show you this. If we don't do join, we just finish our statement with then except. If I run this program, we won't see anything. Okay, and if I add dot join, we will see our result print out on the console. So there we go. Okay, so this is how send async works. Okay, everything happens in the background, while not blocking your main thread. You can do other tasks on the main thread while this client is sending requests and receiving response from the server in the background, and it all handled using this API. And as a developer, you don't need to write anything at all. So now I have switched back to my browser because we're done with getting response from the remote server. Now it's time to parse our JSON data. In order to do that, we're going to need a third-party library, and it's called orgs.json for Java. So org.json maven. Yes. So let's click this, and then let's choose the latest build. So if you're using Maven or Gradle or any build system, you can just copy this and put it inside of your build file. But for me, I'm just having a simple project. All I wanted to do is download the jar file and put that inside of my project. So I will click on this GitHub link page and then scroll down, find this, click here if you just want the jar file. So just click it and download the jar file. So now the download is completed, and I switch back to IntelliJ. Let's add that jar file to our project. So click on File and Project Structure, and make sure you choose Modules and then Dependencies, and then click this Add and Jars and Directories. So find where you download it. For me, it's inside of IntelliJ projects and this JSON .jar file. Click OK and check it, and then hit Apply, and then OK. now we can see under external libraries, we have this JSON jar file successfully added to our project. Now we can start to parse our JSON data. So now let's create our method to parse the JSON data. So down at the bottom, and I'll say public static and string parse. The parameter should be also a string and call it response body. Okay, and first of all, let's take a look at our returned JSON body. So it starts with a brackets, which means this JSON is a JSON array. And inside of JSON array, it's a bunch of JSON objects separated by comma. So first, we will need to get JSON array from our response. And then what we want to do is to loop through the JSON array and getting JSON object out of each index. And from that JSON object, we can get user ID, ID, and title. So let's see how to do that. First, we will define our JSON array. So JSON array and albums equals new JSON array. Inside of the parentheses is our response body. So we get JSON array from response body. And once we get that, we can use a for loop to loop through all the albums. So integer I is 0 and I less than albums dot length and then I plus plus. Okay, so inside of for loop, every iteration we can get one JSON object out of the albums. So let's create our JSON object. We call album. So singular equals albums dot get JSON object, and inside of the parentheses is the index, which is I. So the current iteration. Okay. Once we get the JSON object, we can extract user ID, ID, and title from this object. So for ID, I'm going to use integer ID equals album dot get int, and is the key. The key is ID. And then for user ID, I'll use integer. So user ID equals album dot get int, and the key is user ID. And next is title, which is string. We want to do title equals album dot get string. Key is title. So nope, title. Okay. Now we extract the data, and depending on your application, what you want to do with this data, you may want to store this into your database. You may want to display this in your application, on your UI. You know, for me, for this tutorial, I'm just going to print out on the console and see we extract this information successfully. So system.out.println ID plus some space, and then plus title, then plus some space, and then plus user ID. Okay, and then last we need to return just return null, because we don't want to return anything. And then now we finish our parse method. So let's see how to use this. First, let's use this with our method 1. So let's comment out method 2, and then uncommon method 1, and then uncommon this connection. So right after we did our system printout, we can call our parse function, okay, parse method, and we'll pass in the response content dot to string. And let's see, we should get 100 albums printed out with ID, title, plus user ID. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. We have from 1 to all the way down to 100, right? So we parsed that information successfully. And now let's see how to do parse with our method 2. So let's comment out the first method again. Then this one as well. An uncommon method 2. And then for this, we need to do is to change the then accept to then apply. And then inside of this, we want to call the parse method. So parse method is inside of main. So main : parse. Okay, this is the way to call parse using lambda expression. And let's see if we can print out the same result. So let's run this. And there we go. So we print out 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 100, every album. So there we go. That's how we use org.json to parse JSON data and extract informations from our JSON object. That's the whole project. We talked about 2 different methods to do HTTP request and using the third-party library to parse JSON data. And hopefully you learned something from this tutorial. And thanks for watching. See you guys next time.